Hi, I'm Helen Carouzos and I'm a counselling psychologist and I have my own private practice in Cheshire. I primarily see older teenagers and adults for various mental health conditions. I'm excited to be here today. I'm here with the Fluxxt Group guys talking about managing feelings of failure.
Hello, Helen.
Hi, Jim.
How are you doing?
I'm well, thank you. And yourself?
I'm really well, thank you. Thank you so much for your time today and welcome to Fluxxt Talks.
You're welcome.
Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yes, well, I'm Helen Carouzos and I'm a counselling psychologist and I have my own private practice in Cheshire and I primarily see older teenagers and adults for various mental health issues. The most common reasons why people come to see me are for chronic stress, depression, anxiety, OCD, relationship issues, work issues, so really just a lot, yes. And I've been a psychologist for over 20 years, as you could probably tell from my accent. I initially trained in Australia, been in the UK for 8 years and enjoying working for myself and just getting to meet all sorts of different people and of course helping them to get the best out of life, and of course, mental health is something I'm really passionate about. So, really like to work with people to help empower them to be that better version of themselves.
Amazing. So there's a very broad amount of things going on there.
Yeah.
But what I wanted to hone in on today with this particular conversation was the feelings of how we manage that pressure and failure and things. So, digging right into it. My first question really is, we all experience in our day-to-day lives feelings of failure, and that can be, messing up a presentation at work. It can be things as small as missing a train. We always get that small and large elements of pressure through our day-to-day lives. But how can we counter this, and what can we do when it comes to tackling our own feelings of failure?
Well, that's a really good question, and I think first of all we really need to say from the outset that we all have these feelings of failure. It's nothing that's unusual. I think, look, me included, I'll put my hand up and say, I have sometimes feelings of failure. It's completely normal. I think what's important in terms of your question, in terms of tackling, I think it's really important that people can learn to separate their feelings of failure from the facts of the situation, and that's something I primarily focus on with my clients. So you might feel like a failure, but are you really a failure? And I think understanding those two things, that they're two separate things and not the same thing, that you might feel that you may have not done well or plans may have not gone as well as you expected, or you might have messed up a presentation. Sure, I've done that before. But I think what we do is we tend to catastrophize and then we blow things out to be, we blow things out of proportion. And so what we end up doing is focusing on that one thing that didn't go well. And the thing is, maybe 90% of that presentation went really well, and we're going to hone in on that 10% that didn't go too well. And because we're genetically pre-programmed to look for the negativity in situations, that's the bit that we focus on, and we conveniently ignore the 90% where it went really well. So we ignore that. And like I said, and I think it's got a lot to do with this concept, the phenomenon of negativity bias. And that's what we all have. We're genetically predisposed to pay more attention to the negative part of the situation and less on the positive. And that goes way back to our cave-dwelling ancestors. So back in the day, people were on the lookout for danger. So the bad stuff was the danger. So they needed to be on the lookout for any man-eating beasts, and it was about life and death. So people were programmed. What was really important is to be safe and to not be killed. So hence that hypervigilance around anything that potentially can threaten our life. And so that has stayed with us. So genetically it is there. The thing we don't realise is now in modern day society, we're not faced by man-eating beasts anymore, but because we're still genetically predisposed, we still respond that way.
Yeah.
So, i.e., messing up the presentation, we're not going to look at the other factors that may have gone well. We're just going to focus on the bit that says danger, danger, the bit that went wrong.
Yeah,
oh my goodness, what does this mean? I'm a failure.
So does that, is that more prevalent in the world of work today? So obviously, modern working pressures are on the increase significantly. And the big buzzword that always comes to my mind when we talk about failure and catastrophizing, like you say, is imposter syndrome. So, are we seeing a rise in that? And why is that? Why are we seeing so many people now refer to imposter syndrome within their working lives?
Again, hand up. I sometimes suffer from imposter syndrome.
Me too.
Anyone else? And I think that's a fair point. And just to clarify, imposter syndrome is when we have ongoing feelings of self-doubt and personal incompetence despite our qualifications, our experience, our skills, our talents, all those things. And yet we still have this. And I think it's really an important one to discuss because I think it really gets in the way of people taking opportunities up. So there might be an opportunity at work. It may be a promotion. It might be to get involved in a very different project that you haven't done before. Or it might even just be in your personal life, going to a new social situation where you may have not done that before. So taking risks is something that people tend to back away from because they're not comfortable or not confident in being able to just be their authentic selves because they feel like they need to be someone else. And I think that has probably, in my opinion, got a lot to do with social media. I think when you look at social media, what tends to happen is we don't see people's lives as they really are. We tend to just post the happy bits or the best bits. And I'm wondering if that's happening a lot and people are following that and then we follow people who seem to be happy, who seem to have their life together, who seem to be successful. And there's not much mention of the realities of perhaps a bad day they might have been having or they're struggling with their mental health. So there is this impression that we form about other people and just how perfect their lives might be, when in actual fact they may not be, it may not be realistic. So I think social media has a lot to answer for in that way. And look, don't get me wrong, social media is great in a lot of respects. I mean, it helps me or enables me to keep in touch with my family, back home in Australia. Great. But the downside is that we feel we need to present another version of ourselves that might not be authentically who we are. And I think that taps into that imposter syndrome as well. Other things too, I think in the workplace, people who are marginalised in our society, maybe, there's this unintentional bias or what we call microaggressions.
Okay.
So this is where people might, well-intended people, on the surface may express opinions or may make comments that are really, around ageism or sexism or, racism. So they're not intentionally, but because they're so positively and nicely coded, the person receiving the message is somewhat confused about, okay, am I right to be offended here, or was it unintentional? And so if that's tapping into something about them, then they're probably not going to have the confidence to actually present themselves in the way they want to. So they might not put themselves forward for opportunities, and they may actually be the best qualified person in the organisation. They may be the most skilled, and yet they feel that for these reasons, they don't feel like they belong to an organisation or to a group because of these doubts that they have,
Well, that's a really, really interesting point, and it kind of flows into my next question, which is obviously we have feelings of failure, we talk about imposter syndrome, but with that comes, particularly in work, dramatic amounts of pressure. Particularly, in a high pressure role, extreme pressure on said individuals can be, can take a dramatic impact on their lives. And when you're saying, these small microaggressions, surely that really exacerbates that issue. But how can we, when it comes to, when you work with clients, in particular, I imagine some of these are very high, have these very high pressure roles. How can we manage that pressure? either from the top down or at very many times at the bottom up. And the phrase that always comes to my mind is very lonely at the top. So how do we manage that microaggression? How do we avoid doing that to people that are on our teams? But also in the same way, how can we avoid, again, imposter syndrome, feelings of overexerted pressure, in our working lives?
I mean, I wish we could avoid it. I wish we could, sure. In an ideal society where this wouldn't exist at all. Yeah. But it does, and I think it's going to be here for a little while longer. Rather than concentrate on eliminating it, I think what's important is we concentrate on managing it and being aware. So I think awareness is part of this, of what you're saying, and to be able to talk about it at work, when someone makes a comment or if you're not sure, is to maybe have those conversations, and just like about mental health too, we're very good at talking about it, but how do we actually demonstrate that? So it's not enough just to have the awareness and just know that imposter syndrome is in the workplace, but what are we actually doing about it? So for instance, is one of the reasons that's reinforcing the imposter syndrome, is it because people are perhaps not getting the recognition they deserve at work because of age, sex, gender, whatever that might be, whatever microaggressions might be going on? Are they not getting the work recognition? Are they perhaps being passed over for promotions? Are they like I said before, they have the qualifications and experience, but they just don't have the confidence to go that step further. So what is it culturally about an organisation? What is it about the leadership of the organisation that might be getting in the way? And does that person at the top, for instance, do they need to maybe go and have conversations with other people about this? Do they have like a mentor, someone they can actually talk to that, maybe talks through some of these issues that are going on? But I think communication is really key, and maybe just bringing it up with your team, and just not because you're blaming anyone, but just because this is a commonplace reality, and as a team, it might be a good idea to start talking about this, to raise the awareness, and to call it out when it's happening as well, and to say, look, I know it wasn't intended. However, when you said this is how I interpreted it. Can you please not say that anymore? Or I think it's just about people owning it when they're uncomfortable. Otherwise, they're going to sit in silence. And they're going to just watch opportunities just getting continually passed up, because they don't feel they have a right to speak up and to assert themselves when they feel that they've been slighted in this way.
I completely agree. I think, when you talk about that empathetic approach and trying to put yourself in someone else's shoes, I think it's incredibly powerful, particularly in the workplace. When it's smaller companies and new businesses, that establishing that culture in the first instance is obviously quite easy. What would you recommend to like a great big company where this has been going on for some time, and it's quite difficult, I imagine, at those times to shift into this more talkative environment? What would your recommendation be?
That's a hard one, because they've acquired these habits or unhealthy habits. So you said something interesting then. You said that it becomes known that this is happening. So how does it become known? How did it become known? Did someone report it to HR? Did an employee go away and complain to HR about that? I don't know. So I think what's important is that it's for organisations to take a step back and go, look, we got it wrong. That's okay. We now know better. Let's do it properly. Let's do it respectfully. Let's do it the way it needs to be done. Let's change our communications. Let's change our culture. So there are organisational and consultant psychologists such as myself where we might actually go out to the business and maybe advise on maybe some training, some small group training with management and with employees around improving team culture, communication processes, and essentially equipping people with the skills and the permissions to speak out, to voice their opinions in a way, because at the end of the day, no one can read minds.
No, That's good.
Yeah.
So where would you start? Say you're going into a new business and they're saying, Helen, I need you to come in and help us, but I just don't know where to start to help, build up the confidence of my teams and improve my culture. What advice would you give that leader that's looking to make their first steps into this culture improvement?
Well, I think let's not overthink this. Let's just keep it basic. And okay, let's get people together, put on some morning tea, some lunch, coffee, and just have a chat. Okay, so, and maybe just point out I would be pointing out to the leader that this is a time for possible change, that, obviously, they're at the top there. So how they behave, they're essentially role models. So really their team is watching everything they do, everything that they say. So it's really important that the right messages are then filtered down. And so the way you do that is by getting everyone together and saying, look, we do realise that there are problems at the moment, and we want to change that. And I think just being authentic, just being very real about what the issues are, and that you've hired some experts who have come on board to help identify what the issues are, and most importantly, what do people want at work? When we're talking about improving the culture or improving how people work together, what do they actually have in mind? Rather than leaders sucking ideas out of their thumb, let's ask the people.
Interestingly, one of the things that always comes back to me when it does come to talking to people is an interpretation from leader to team member of a negative mindset.
Yeah.
Negative mindsets are very, very common, and it kind of leans back to what we were saying at the beginning when it comes to that feeling of failure. So, what if we move away from the leader and into more the operational team?
Yeah.
How do people start to work away from a consistent negative mindset?
Again, I think it's important to own it, that if you're not aware of it yourself, I think it's about being open to other people giving you feedback when they feel that you're being negative. And sure, you might take offence, and we don't always like to hear the truth. I think that's just a basic human, tendency of ours. But I think for people themselves, it is again back to that communication piece, talking about it, owning it. And if you're not sure, you don't know how to go about doing, improving your mindset, maybe ask someone. It doesn't even have, you don't necessarily even have to go to a therapist. I mean, that may be the last option. You might want to talk to a friend or a family member or someone that you can trust at work that you can go to and say, look, I've been experiencing these negative feelings. I have these feelings of failure. I don't know what to do with them, and I think just having someone listen without judgment, I think is really important, because you never know what you might get back in terms of what that person has to say about you and how they perceive you, because how we perceive ourselves might be different to, say, the way you perceive me.
Yeah, for sure.
So there's your perception, other people's perception, and somewhere in the middle is this thing called the truth.
Nice. That's really, really profound.
Yeah.
It's interesting when you're saying, sometimes just the power of listening and just giving someone that opportunity just to talk can have such an effect.
Yeah.
It's really, really powerful, and it's great to hear because for me personally, that is something that's very reassuring, just having that confidence. I am very lucky to have the confidence just to talk to certain people, and that does help. So that's really, really nice to hear. One of the big questions I always get asked, and one of the big questions we always hear here at Fluxxt Group is there enough awareness and around the pressure and the constant feeling of failure within our day-to-day lives? We've spoken a lot today about the power of talking and the power of leaders talking to their teams and vice versa, but should there be a system in place or systems in place to build awareness of how we combat this failure, and how people should just be opening up more about the feelings of imposter syndrome and things like that?
So yes, I think we could be doing more. I think it's the same thing, because it all comes under mental health, really. I think at the end of the day, we can build that awareness and we can keep talking about the imposter syndrome, and that's fantastic, because you need to be aware of something before you can actually change it. And if it doesn't challenge you, it won't change you. Okay, well, that's what I believe anyway. But the thing is, the awareness really mustn't stop there. We need to actually start behaving in the way that we believe about something. Otherwise, it's just paying it lip service, isn't it? You know, so it's great to have the awareness, but then go that one step further and demonstrate in your behaviour. So it might be in the way you communicate with a colleague. It may be in the way that you speak to your husband or wife or whoever it might be. So it's just, and that comes back to a very critical point, values.
Okay.
So, you know, what are our values? Not just in an organisation, but for everybody, what are our values? Our values are those things that drive us, the things that we're I'd like to think that we're all getting somewhere, you know, and values are they're not the same as goals, which is more destination inclined.
Sure.
Values are more like compass points.
Yes.
You know, so you want to be heading in this direction. Not that you're going to the objective is not to get there, it's about getting there. So what is it about your relationships that you value? You know, what do you look for in your relationships when you're at work or about your career? You know, what version of yourself do you want to be in all of these life categories? Spirituality, citizenship, community, physical well-being, mental well-being. So these are all life categories, if you like.
Yeah.
And what we then can do with that, and this is what I do with my clients, is actually sit them down and do a values audit. I mean, when was the last time you did a values audit, Jim?
I have never done a values audit.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll need to do one.
Let's do it.
You know, so for instance, I'll let you choose a life category. Could be career, could be relationships, could be spirituality, could be community, could be recreation, interests.
Let's go community.
Community, okay.
Sure.
So tell me a few things about community. So when you think of community, what are some key words, ideas, aspects of it that really get you going?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I would definitely, within community, citizenship, which is the one you mentioned, empathy. I think being able to understand everyone around. So one of the words that comes off like sondering.
Yeah.
So just being able to, you know, understand or try to put yourself in someone else's shoes. I think it's really prominent. Teamwork is definitely one. Safety. I think for me, they would be the big ones when it came to me thinking about community.
Right, okay. So if I just picked one of those things and said teamwork.
Yeah.
Okay, so what is it about teamwork? How would you know that you were doing teamwork within this category of community? How would you get a sense? How would you know that there was teamwork happening?
Oh, these are hard.
Yeah.
I suppose when it comes to teamwork, it's...
So I think of the behaviours.
It's obviously multiple people work together, helping other individuals, succeeding together. To attain a goal. Yeah. That for me would be very much teamwork. From a societal point, I suppose it's when it came to these are really hard.
That's why we don't do them that often.
Yeah. From a societal point, when it came to teamwork, it's, you know, living in harmony, if you like, and just living our day-to-day lives. If you think a city like Manchester being so big, we almost work. It has to be teamwork all the time to make sure that we obey the traffic laws, that the buildings are built together, that we don't hurt each other and offend each other.
So how do you demonstrate teamwork? If I was looking at you, how would I tell that you were teamwork, that you were doing teamwork? What would be different about your behaviour? What would you be doing? What would you be saying?
My big thing for teamwork from like a community point is just listening. So obviously there's a lot of challenges for lots of different people out there. So empathy for me is a huge word. So I would definitely go down that route, and it's just like trying to understand or just being polite to people, helping if someone needs help and having that confidence to respond if they need help.
Right, okay.
I suppose that would be
okay, so think about that.
Yeah.
And then think about how successful do you think you are out of 10, 10 being really successful at it. Are you in doing that?
I will be perfectly honest. I feel, I suppose this comes down to sometimes you just have those days where you want to be selfish. Yeah. So I would be harsh to myself. I'd put myself at maybe a 5 or a 6.
Okay. All right. So a 5 or a 6. How important is that? What you just described to me. How important is that out of 10?
Probably an 8.
An 8?
Yeah,
Isn't
for
it
sure.
Interesting? And like with many of my clients that I do this with, in terms of importance, they all say 8, 9, 10. Oh yeah, that's important to
Yeah,
me.
super important,
Oh yeah, that's important to me. Yeah, absolutely. So how well do you think you're living that value? Oh, that's about a 3. Or that's about a 5. And like you said, it was about a 5.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you're saying it's really important, but your demonstration of it is lower. That's not to say it's woefully low.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, you obviously you're practicing some of that, but then that's the disparity, and that's the bit that we work on a
Yeah.
one-to-one, is looking at the gap between what you say is important and actually what people see and what you're actually doing, how you're living it. So what we then do is analyse the gap, if you like, and go,
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
so if you're a 5 now, how do we get to the 8?
I think that's really
Yeah,
interesting. Yeah, and I mean, it looks terrible on camera now, but obviously it's hypocrisy almost, because I'm saying we should be like this and we should be that. But there are certainly days where you just wake up and you haven't slept well, or you're stuck in traffic, and teamwork from like a societal point, a community point, does seem to go out the window quite quickly.
Yeah.
So when the way that you've just done that, it's quite profound and it's interesting, because it does make me think, okay, I could be better.
Exactly.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
And that's, champion student here. Yeah, so that's what I do. When you asked me before how I help
Yeah.
people, that's basically one of the many things that I do with my clients, is really do that piece around values is really, really critical.
That's really, really interesting, because you could take that into, obviously I picked community, trying to be really broad, but you could put that into the working environment and get people and look at that disparity between where they feel the goal, the value should be, to where they are now. I can see that as an incredibly useful tool for a lot of teams in the workplace to really,
Spot on.
to visualize where they are.
How many times have I walked into an organisation and they got this beautiful board about, these are our values. Look at us, aren't we fantastic?
Yeah.
And you just look to the side and you think, well, that ain't consistent with that.
Yeah,
What's happening? And then you learn all about their behaviours and how they're treating each other. And there might be some disrespect or miscommunication, imposter syndrome, whatever it might be going on, microaggressions. And you think, well, how is what I'm seeing consistent with these values? No wonder this organisation has problems and they've called me out.
It really just show the power of the values, and those companies that really live by their values, that should be embedded in everything. That is a very good example, because you read books and you study like how important the values are, but when it comes down to it, that's a fantastic exercise to see if people actually do live their values. So when it comes to feelings of failure, particularly in the workplace, what strategies would you normally use with your clients?
Well, there is a whole host of them, but we talked about the values piece, that was one thing before, but I think when it comes to specific strategies, I always like, if you can remember what we said at the beginning about separating facts from feelings, that even though you might feel like a failure doesn't make you a failure. And we're ready to just jump on the negativity of the situation or imagine the worst possible thing when one thing doesn't go quite well or our plans didn't go according to plan. So I think one of the things I like to do with people is identify what's that little voice in your head saying to you about you. For instance, when things don't go well. So when you have those feelings of failure and you might be telling yourself, for instance, I'm a failure. How many times have we said that to ourselves? Many, okay, me included. Okay, now here's the little strategy for you, but it's couched in a series of questions. So for instance, I might ask them, okay, so how long do you spend thinking about this? Thinking about what? Well, that you're a failure. Well, all the time. Okay, so it's a bit like a washing machine, isn't it? It's just like on spin cycle. It just keeps going round, 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 I'm a failure, I'm a failure, I'm a failure, I'm a failure. The thing is though, when you actually think about it, why do you keep reminding yourself of the same thing? Are you afraid you're going to forget?
Very good point.
How many times have you said you're a failure? Well, okay, I'm a failure, I'm a failure. Well, how many times are you going to tell yourself you're a failure? So can you see you're not moving on to what could be next for you in terms of problem solving, like the messing up the presentation. We're so focused on telling ourselves that we're a failure because that didn't go well, that we're not focusing on, hang on, how can I do this better next time? So we need to get better at separating the facts from the feelings, because if you concentrate on the feelings, it's going to distract you away from the actual thing itself, the actual failure, because the actual failure itself is natural. It's normal.
Yeah.
We're all going to stuff up from time to time. It's okay. Like the famous Greek philosopher Epictetus once said, man is not disturbed by events, but by the view he takes of them. So it's not the actual thing that went wrong that's the issue. It's how we interpret it, what we've taken that to mean about us. Messing up the presentation, that's innocent. That didn't harm anybody. But we're harming ourselves by, exactly. So what I get people to, what I encourage people to do sometimes is answer some questions.
Okay.
So I call them here and now questions. And they're very mindful based, So this is in addition to everything else that I also work with clients around self-care. So are they eating well, drinking enough water, exercise? Before when you were asking me about how to take the pressure off.
Yeah.
It's about looking after yourself as well. It's interesting. It's when things go wrong that people stop doing the things they used to enjoy doing, or doing the things that they know works, like go to the gym or keep seeing friends and family. Suddenly it all just shuts down.
We do. We have a tendency to just kind of head in the sand when something goes wrong, rather than fixing what we know will help.
Because if I bury my head in the sand, it will just go away.
Yeah.
Well, does that really work? No, it doesn't. No. So these particular questions, going back to what I was saying before, is they're very mindful in that very present base. So the first question I ask them is, where are you? So when you're having these feelings of failure, where are you? Well, I'm in my lounge room, I'm in the bedroom, I'm in the kitchen, right? Second question, what are you doing? And I don't mean washing dishes or doing the ironing or working. I mean, what are you doing up here? And they'll say, well, I'm thinking to myself, I'm telling myself I'm a failure.
Yeah.
Right. Third question, is it real? And they might say, yeah, it's real. Okay. Right, how's this for a little bit of a strategy? I'll try it on you now.
Sure. Yeah.
So what would be a self-defeating thought you might have? Would I'm a failure be one of them? Would you say something? Okay, right. Now, I'd like you to say out loud now, I'm a failure.
I'm a failure.
Right. Now say it differently. I'm having the thought that I'm a failure.
I'm having the thought that I'm a failure.
Which sounded...
Yeah, that's already, it's almost teaching your brain straight away.
Cool. Okay, so when it comes to that third question, is it real? They might then discover, I'm having the thought that I'm a failure, so therefore it's not real, because thoughts can't hurt you.
100%, yeah.
They can't hurt you. And I'm here to guarantee, a guarantee, that they won't hurt you and they certainly won't kill you.
Yeah.
Because you know what thoughts are? I break it down to simpler molecular level. They're just letters that make up words, that make up sentences, that just keep going around in your head. So when you think about all the thoughts that you have in a whole day, are they necessarily all true and real?
No, absolutely not.
Well, I can tell you right now, a lot of my thoughts during the day aren't true.
Yeah.
So why does that one have to be true?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, and just applying the context of the thought of failure as opposed to just saying I am a failure.
Yeah, because when you say you're a failure, there's nowhere to go with that.
No.
It's absolute. So because all right, and even if we indulge that and say, okay, let's just assume you are a failure. Let's just even hypothetically, for argument's sake, just say you are a failure. Well, how did you get here today?
Well,
Can you tie your shoelaces? Can you catch a tram? Can you cook for yourself? If you want to talk in absolutes, so there's messing up the presentation and there's being a total failure. How does that equal that?
Yeah.
It doesn't. Yeah. So, but there are backup questions too. So in case someone says, oh yeah, Helen, it is real. I am a failure.
Yeah,
okay, all right. Well, let's go for it then.
These are the really deep-rooted clients.
So the fourth question is, if this idea is real, well, tell me why it's true.
Right, okay.
And they'll go to town on that one. Oh yeah, I can tell you it's true because, when I was 15, and then it reminds me of this, and that's the other thing, our previous experiences may have helped us to form rules or ideas about who we really are or how we need to respond to failure, especially if we've grown up in a family environment, for instance, where, when you're young, you're like a sponge, aren't you? You look up to your role models, your mum and your dad. Your mum and your dad are the first man and the first woman in your life, so you get from them what it's like to fail and how that's experienced. So then we start to form these ideas, these beliefs, these rules about who we are when we fail and how we need to be thinking or feeling. So we just keep learning that, and every time it happens again, even though it might be a different situation, because now is not then and then is not now, and that's the thing they don't realise.
Does that happen a lot then? So they'll come straight back to that. Oh, I remember now when I failed 3 weeks ago. And
but that was 3 weeks ago, or that was 10 years ago. How is that relevant to these present day circumstances?
And is that quite common then, like linking
back into the past and looking at these rules that they may have formed about themselves? I'll give you a very quick example of my own life.
Yeah, sure.
Growing up, I never really did well at school, and I always struggled with maths. So I remember in year 6, back in Melbourne, my year 6 teacher would get up on the stage, because we had stage in back in the old days when we had blackboards, and chalk and dusters. You're way too young to know.
I would like to believe that, but it's not true, unfortunately.
He's teaching maths, and of course he asks Helen, who's sitting in the front row, a question about, do you know long division? Do you remember long division? Yeah, right, I didn't get long division.
Nor did I.
So he was asking me questions in front of everyone. If you can imagine how embarrassing that might be. Yeah. And I wasn't giving him the answer that he needed, and he was getting agitated. He was getting angry. He was banging his fists on the blackboard. I thought he was going to put a hole through it. He was that angry. Right. So very scary, and I'm in tears. And then after that, he says, "You've got to stay behind because we need to go through this long division." Do you think I was able to think clearly? No, because all I was thinking, I'm a failure. I can't do maths.
Yeah, of course. Because he's just rammed it down your throat. Okay.
From that point on, I convinced myself, Jim, that I couldn't do maths.
Right, okay.
So if I'm put on the spot, like, what's 8 and 7, I'd freeze up.
And is that
a change in our brains where we just think because it's been honed in?
It's the schema. It's the schema.
Yeah.
So we form, we just like you go to the gym and you condition your muscle when you're doing certain exercises. Whether that be push-ups or whatever, deadlifts, whatever you're doing, you're conditioning your muscle because that muscle's going to get stronger and it's going to get toned. And it's the same with these life lessons. Right. Positive or negative, So for me, it was negative because I virtually convinced myself, and I had this strongly held belief that I just can't do maths. So whenever I was put on the spot, I would just get really anxious and not be able to respond. And then, obviously I identified that and I worked on that, and I've come to the point now, well, that's okay. I don't need to love maths. I just do the basics and that's fine, So the conversation we have with ourselves, I think, is, really important here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So going back to our questions, so we digressed a bit there, but I think it was a really important point. So that relates to the fourth question about why is it true? Not realising that was then, this is now, and we can change our minds about ourselves. Just because we used to think that way doesn't mean we still have to. Who said so? The only person who says so is ourselves.
Agreed. Yeah.
So if you're going to convince me then that it's true, well, then we've got to do the flip side. And this is question 5. Why is this idea, the idea being I'm a failure, why is this idea false?
Okay, interesting. Well, they must struggle with that. That must be really tricky.
They do. And that's when we look at mindsets and we look at, okay, if you were helping a friend, and they said to you, I messed up the presentation, Jim, I'm a failure. What would you say to that? Would you say, yeah, you are?
Well, no, exactly.
Just because, so being able to step outside of that, very rigid mindset and be able to explore other possibilities, I think is a really important point. And I'll give you an example of that. I had a friend recently, she might be watching this one day, but I won't mention names, and she had this kind of catastrophizing habit. She was worried that she would make a mistake at work and her boss wouldn't be happy, and it quickly escalated to, well, he's going to sack me, and then because of this mistake, because I'm not going to, I wouldn't have done my job properly, and that means I'm going to be out on the street homeless with my kids.
Wow. Okay, that's an escalation.
Yeah, that is an escalation, isn't it? And then I actually over lunch, we did these questions, and so I took her through it, and she gave me all the reasons true. And then when I asked the fifth question, so why is this idea false? She looked at me and she said, well, I guess so-and-so, let's just call him Jim, that's her boss, is a reasonable guy. Yeah. We've talked about things going wrong before, it's okay, he'd be understanding, we'd talk it through, and then we would know how to do better next time. So, what was I so worried about? So just even thinking how it could, the possibility of her that it might not be true was quite earth-shattering for her. In fact, she said, Helen, I just feel like I've just won the lotto.
Well, that's great.
Yeah, just, because when you're thinking negatively like that, you're not looking at other aspects of other interpretations or other options. You're just thinking about, I've made a mistake and I'm going to lose my job and I'm going to be homeless.
Tunnel vision.
Catastrophizing to the nth degree. So the moment you ask, how could it be untrue? Why would it be false? Then suddenly they're thinking outside that. Well, I guess it's not false because one time when it happened to me, it actually, where was the exception? What did you learn from that? So we slowly start to get another picture.
Start to build solutions.
Exactly, but it doesn't end there because there's a sixth question.
So
the last question is, just say you happen to convince yourself it is real and it is true and it's not false.
So this is the absolute...
This is the last question, Is what I'm doing, as in this idea I'm trying to convince myself that I'm a failure, is what I'm doing helping me to live happily?
Big question.
Yeah, productively, efficiently, whatever that word might be, because you can apply it to anything really, to any situation. So I doubt that someone can say it's real, it's true, and it's not false, and I feel fantastic about it. I can't see how that could happen. I feel I am a failure and I feel wonderful about it. It doesn't really work that way. No. So then they realise, actually it's not helping me to live happily. So then we can backtrack on the questions and go, okay, now where did you go off track? At what point did you start imagining the worst, catastrophize? Where is it possibly irrational or unhelpful? Where did you pick up this rule, perhaps? And then that's another conversation.
So do you work your way back and then always come back to that ultimate question, which is, okay, well, that's clearly not making you happy, so why, brilliant.
So that's what we do for those situations where we're telling ourselves something, we're trying to convince ourselves that, usually negative, of something that may actually not be true.
Amazing. That's really, really cool.
So, and just that other technique about having the thought, that the thought is different to what you're telling yourself, because it's just a thought. Thoughts, the only way thoughts can bring you harm is if you actually believe them. And if you believe them, then you're going to start behaving like you believe them.
I have a lot of time for that phrase.
Yeah.
I've personally picked up so much there.
Yeah.
So, Helen, thank you so much for your time. That was fantastic.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
How can people learn more?
Well, you can always log on to my website, helencarouzos.co.uk. I've got lots of information there about what I do and all the services I offer. It's not just the one-to-one counselling, but I also do group training, I do life coaching or executive coaching as well. And also my phone number is there, so you can always pick up the phone and just have a chat to me. I'm happy and willing to talk to anybody about mental health because I just love it. And as you could probably tell today, I could just speak for England and Australia when it comes to mental health. So by all means, get in touch. And if you find that these couple of strategies are not particularly hitting the mark for you, that's okay. They maybe at that point it is about reaching out for some professional assistance and maybe seek out psychologists, such as myself, or therapists or counsellors who are appropriately qualified and experienced to help you with what it is you need.
Agreed wholeheartedly. Thank you so much. That was ace.
Thank you. How was that, guys?
Awesome.
Yeah?
Very good.
Did I behave myself again?